Namaste. In the world of therapies, there are more therapies than we can count on. Every year, we see emergence of a new therapy, and its efficacy is always questioned. And to discuss this, today we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. And today we'll talk about 7 stories, which is a kind of therapy. And what it is all about, we will ask him because he is the one who's coined it. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start with what the world of psychotherapy is today like? Like when we say there are so many therapies coming up.
Today, the world of psychotherapy resembles more the world of arts rather than the world of science. Unlike in sciences, medical sciences, you don't have to undertake clinical trials of a therapy before launching the therapy into the market. So whether you launch a allopathic drug or some other drug, you have to pass through certain efficacy trials. Unfortunately, in the world of therapy, you launch the product first and then allow the clinical trials to happen in society as it proceeds. And this creates a unique situation that on one hand, we don't have a very responsible attitude towards toward patients. And on the other hand, this gives freedom to innovate. We are not stifled by the regulatory processes and authorities. This being the case, the governments world over, by and large, leave the area of psychotherapy free, and they expect the free market situation to take care of therapies which are good and which are not good. Over a period of time, they believe good therapies will survive and the not good therapies will not survive. However, the damage that happens before not good therapy is proven not good in society, that damage is seen as a kind of a evil you have to live with. In that context, we have more than 100 different types of therapies. And at times it becomes even difficult to separate two therapies from each other because they are so alike and yet are practiced under two different names. One survey of the entire world of psychotherapy, which was done a few years back, it tells us that there are 55 major psychotherapies being practiced across the world. And when they say major, they mean at least a few hundred or a few thousand people who use that particular form of therapy. And this they have found across the world. Some therapies may be used only in 3 or 4 countries, some global, but number of people using them are substantial. Out of these 55 main psychotherapies, the types of psychotherapies, 10 of them are the real major ones, which command almost 75% of the market share. And the rest 25% is distributed among the other 45. So they have very low market share, although in terms of absolute numbers, given the population of the world, they have substantial amount of people they are treating. So when we look at the major 10 psychotherapies, we can divide them into a few categories. The first category is thought-focused psychotherapies. Psychotherapy approaches which focus primarily on thought. That does not mean they have an exclusive approach to either emotion or behavior. All therapies use thought, emotion, and behavior in some way or the other, directly or indirectly, but we are talking about the focus. So the first category is psychotherapy groups, or rather group of psychotherapies which use which are thought oriented psychotherapies. The focus is thought. First category. Second category is emotion focused psychotherapies. In the first category of thought focused, we have cognitive therapies, we have REBT, we have DBT. In the second, emotion focused, we have psychoanalysis, ISTDP, emotion centered therapy, some forms of psychodrama, certain forms of uh, experiential dynamic therapy. The third category is behavioral therapies. And here you have the classical behavioral therapy and various uh, customized forms of behavioral therapy. The fourth category is philosophically oriented psychotherapies. So existential psychotherapy, logotherapy, they form in this group where the focus is more on a philosophical aspect of mind or life. And then you have alternative or holistic therapies, which includes pranic healing, Reiki, acupressure, acupuncture, Tai Chi, certain forms of yoga, certain shamanic practices, and things of those types. Certain holotropic breathing exercises, and the entire range of new age approaches to psychotherapy, which may also include psychodrama, which may also include sound healing or relaxation healing and things of that type. So these five categories by and large cover the range of different approaches in psychotherapy that we have today. Irony is, whenever people do research to find out which psychotherapy on the whole is better, we don't get very clear answers. We end up with certain forms of psychotherapy being better for certain forms of pathologies or personalities, but we don't get an overall good psychotherapy. And we also realize that the healing is more dependent on the healer and the relationship with the healer rather than the technique he follows. So that also limits how empirical we can go in the world of psychotherapy, especially from the regulatory standpoint.
Hmm. And measuring it also is also a little tricky, right? It is not like something which is you can see and you can measure. So,
You have raised a very good question actually. And this gets us into the depths of certain issues. For example, how do you measure efficacy of any particular form of psychotherapy? One way is to do a before and after testing of the person who undergoes psychotherapy and see the severity of symptoms. And the change in the severity tells you how efficacious the therapy has been. Now this is a approach that most people would like to use, and many psychotherapists do use this approach. But there are difficulties with this approach. Let us see the difficulties, which is very interesting to see. First, the whole idea of uh, uh, this whole idea of confidentiality. Let us say one particular form of psychotherapy produces results in 2 months, and we want to study how it can be brought down to 1 month. How do we study it? Because the sessions by and large are confidential, and you cannot put every session for supervision. At times, clients will not allow you to do it. Maybe in some countries, regulatory checks and balances can also be there. So that is one aspect, the whole confidentiality and the client permission and the regulatory permission aspect. Then there is a second aspect which is even more profound, and that is uh, What do you call healing? Because we see in psychoanalysis that in long-term psychoanalysis, often the person comes with one complaint. That complaint may be resolved to the tune of 75%. But at the same time, three other complaints which he never started off with were found to be true, uh, were found to be relevant in the course of psychotherapy after 100 sessions were over, and then they started getting healed. So if you want to do a pre and post, it's very difficult to do pre and post of this kind of situation. And the third is even more mysterious, and this also happens in psychoanalysis very often, that the person comes with a complaint X. In fact, he has complaints X, Y, and Z in life, but Y and Z are so normalized, he doesn't even see them as complaints. For example, one person comes to therapy for depression and he has a problem with eating uh, spicy things. He can't just touch spicy things. Not because of any biological issue, but there is some psychological neurotic issue related to anything spicy. Uh, and this has started with him not from childhood, because he grew up in a high spice eating country, India. So he used to eat it till some time and then he just developed an aversion to it. Now the therapy goes on for 7 years. And at the end of 7 years, the person is able to resolve substantially his Oedipus, so almost completely the depression that he had. And he also realizes that the difficulty with regard to the spicy food is completely gone, though in 7 years of therapy, he never discussed it with the therapist. So it never came into therapy for being discussed, and yet it got resolved. Now, how do you calculate this kind of gains? And these kind of gains are numerous in many deep and long-term psychotherapy approaches. So it is not easy to do the measurement, not only because it is difficult to generate measuring tools, but also because this kind of phenomena happen in long-term therapy. And therefore, it's very difficult to do a classical double-blind pre and post study in the area of psychotherapy. That does not mean we go on the other extreme and say we just can't do any empirical work in psychotherapy. But we have to recognize that while we can do and we should do and we must do, there are limitations of the context, that we are not as free to rigorously apply empirical evaluation as we are free in a classical medical setup.
And moreover, I think, sir, it is even a process. It's a continuous process, right?
True. Because some of
Like
the
you get healed of one, yeah,
sorry, you were saying something.
you get healed of one problem, and you should be capable enough to handle another.
True.
That is the state where, yeah.
So that's also a very good point, because some of the outcomes of the therapy are long term. So some of the gains that you have made in therapy will give you dividends over a long period of time. And how do you calculate those long term outcomes?
So, sir, historically, how did this evolve? Therapy, the psychotherapy, to say.
In the East, we always had meditative techniques, spiritual techniques, mystical techniques, occult techniques to deal with this entire area of mental health. Ayurveda has a speciality. Ayurveda is the ancient medical science of India. It has a speciality called Bhut Vidya, and that deals with the area of mental health. Similarly, Yoga also has exercises for mental health. In Ayurveda, there are prescriptions for certain herbs and food items for enhancing mental health. There are certain processes which are done to cure certain problems using certain particular oils which is put at particular places and so on. So the East had its own traditions of spiritual, mystical, occult, yogic, Ayurvedic practices to deal with mental health. And here we find a mixture of spirituality, psychology, and philosophy. Not theology, but philosophy, spirituality, and psychology. That has been the tradition in the East. And this continued for a very long time, trying to deal with it with social support, with Ayurveda, with energy healing practices, with yogic practices, and so on. When we look at other parts of the world, they had shamanic practices, tribal practices, as well as uh, certain energy healing, crystal healing practices to deal with this issue. With coming of the industrial revolution and the upsurge of the empirical science, all of this by and large were pushed into background, and much of the knowledge was lost, and they were also looked down upon as something primitive. And the medical materialist view of the mind that started taking over. So after industrial revolution till advent of Freud, we don't see much in the area of psychotherapy. It had become more and more biologically oriented. With Sigmund Freud about 105 years back, we see a Western upsurge of psychotherapy in society. Let me not say a kind of a advent, not upsurge, but an advent of psychotherapy in the Western civilization in a rigorous way. Before Freud, we had quite a strong movement of hypnosis and uh, autosuggestion and mesmerism and exorcism. But exorcism you can put out as something religious, but hypnosis was very strong before Freud came, but then there was a very big gap, and hypnosis also was put on the sidelines. And then we have Freud, and with Freud, the emotion focused psychoanalysis became very popular. And this continued for quite some time, almost 50-75 years. And then the behavioral thing made an advent. So the behavioral therapy made its presence felt after psychoanalysis, which was very emotion focused and articulation focused. And so you had psychoanalysis, which is emotion and articulation focused, then behavioral therapy, then cognitive therapy, and then we had a combination cognitive behavioral therapy, and then we had emotion centered therapy, and then philosophically oriented therapies, and so on. So this is how the whole thing went on in a chronological way, but the thematic point is that over a period of time, people started developing therapies and tools and diagnostic tools for thought-oriented approaches, emotion-oriented approaches, and behavior-oriented approaches, and some would combo the three of them or two of them. So this is how it evolved, and later on, one group started holistic healing approaches. So they would combine East and West, and DBT is one good for example of this, which combines meditation and which combines certain areas from CBT. And then we had psychodrama and other holistic healing approaches which combine insights from everywhere. Another group of people started focusing on the problems or effects. So there was one group which created psychotherapy which was only based upon problems. So schizophrenia oriented therapy or depression oriented therapy, or some people focused on affects, anger therapy or guilt therapy and so on. So then it emerged into a very creative thing. Some people like Stanislav Grof, he uh, developed this holotropic breathing, which was also a very deeply cleansing technique. And then we had this video tape recorded ISTDP and EDT. So this is a continuous process. It's a very creative field. It's an open creative landscape, and people keep developing therapies. I think that's a good part of it, that we have quite an amount of innovation here. And I'm sure as we empirically investigate more of them, we will be able to separate the efficient from the less efficient and synthesize them into something more efficient.
But we already had so many therapies. Then why did we keep on developing therapies? Was the efficacy questioned, or what was it?
Uh, the first thing that we realize in the area of psychotherapy is this, that everything works on someone and nothing works on everyone. And therefore, we need a variety of approaches for variety of people and variety of problems. So this is a general experience that you get in the area of psychotherapy. Once this is in the center, it becomes natural that we should have an open landscape for creativity, innovation, and permutations and combinations. So this is one general comment on why we keep getting new therapies. Second, every form of new therapy adds something to the existing therapy situation as it is. Maybe the whole therapy does not survive for 25 years, but it leaves behind a couple of very rich insights which become integral part of other approaches which are enriched thereby. Second important element. Third important point why I had to develop 7 stories therapy, or you can also call it 7 stories meditation, is a set of reasons. Number one, psychotherapy across the world is very costly, and more so in India. And in India, where I live, I see that it is beyond the reach of 90% of people. Now, what kind of healing modality is this that 90% of people cannot afford? And there is no way to bring down the affordability, because uh, a good therapist, if he wants to do justice, he cannot do more than 3 to 4 sessions a day. If he starts working 9 to 9, inevitably it has an effect on his efficacy. If not in the short run, definitely in the long run. So if you can't do more than 3 to 4 sessions, let us say somebody has more capacity, let us say 5. Then if you have to earn your living from 5 sessions, per session cost cannot go low. And this creates a problem, because the therapist has to survive, so he cannot charge it below a level. And that level is above the reach of 90% of people. That is one cost element. Second is the sheer availability of therapists, good therapists. So in India, where we would, according to WHO estimates, need somewhere around 75,000 psychotherapists, and say good psychotherapists, not those who just have a degree, because in India there are two different things, right? We have a huge problem of unemployability, people who have degrees but don't have skills and knowledge. The same thing is true in psychotherapy also, that when we look at really competent psychotherapists, we don't find more than 5,000 for 1.3 billion people, and that's practically nothing. So this creates a second issue, how to make therapists available to more than 1 billion people in India, out of whom, even if 10 million people need therapy, that itself is a very big number. See, if one-to-one is not possible in psychotherapy given the sheer scale of Indian population, and the same problem is true in Africa and many other parts of world also, I would say almost 2/3 of the world, this problem is by and large the same. And if individual therapy then is not possible, how to do group therapy? Can we have a model of group therapy? Then the next point is, in group therapy, if you want to maintain confidentiality, because that's one of the areas why, one of the points why many people resist group therapy, because the confidentiality is not maintained. So the question is, how do you maintain confidentiality even in group therapy? And in face-to-face group therapy, it's simply not possible. But because of technology, now we have a way out. We can have group therapy with confidentiality. And how can you make the therapy available to people at a distance using technology, using internet? And this can mean across the districts in India, across the states in India, or across the borders. And you can even look at a global delivery of psychotherapy services. Now, this was one aspect of it, the sheer necessity. And then comes the second part, what kind of therapy can address these necessities which are like cast in stone and they have to be addressed and solved. There's no way out. And therefore, something that can respond to this particular situation, address the need for availability, affordability, confidentiality, and which can be standardized and easily taught to new therapists so that they can also do a good job of it, to increase the pool of trained therapists, and that increase of the pool can be done quickly, and which is empirically testable, that nobody has to believe that something is happening because the therapist says something is happening. So these 5 characteristics, so there was a need for a new form of therapy which had these 5 characteristics. It could address availability, affordability, uh, confidentiality, standardization, and empirical validation. So the question was, what kind of therapy can address these needs, can measure up to these demands? And on that basis, I created the 7 stories therapy or 7 stories meditation. And this has been tried out. People have been trained in it. And I think those who did the training and underwent the experience were reasonably satisfied with it.
So, sir, can you explain us in a little more detail what is 7 stories therapy?
Yeah.
And how does it operate in practice?
So, 7 stories therapy operates on the principle of focusing on affect. It uses the focus on thought and behavior also, but the primary focus is on affect. Therapy uses 7 fundamental psychological entities to focus upon. First, anger. Second, fear. Third, pain. Fourth, guilt. Fifth, shame. Sixth, envy. And seventh, inferiority. Some people call all of the 7 as 7 affects. Some people say envy and inferiority are not affects. They are other states, whatever you call them. But these 7 psychological entities are the focus. Now, why I have chosen this? Because this is what you find inevitably arising in therapy of people over a long period of time. That these 7 entities have to be dealt with. regardless of the phenomenological expression of the difficulty or the specificity. So this therapy takes up one by one these 7 entities. So you can cast it in various formats. Let us say if you have more time, you can focus on one entity for 1 month, and the whole therapy then becomes a 7-month therapy. Or you can focus it for 2 months or 3 months, and correspondingly the length varies. Or you can shorten it to 1 week. And the way it operates is, first one by one we take up these entities and we focus on that. What we do is, before let us say this week we are focusing on anger. So before we start it, we give an empirical tool to everybody to measure the level of anger. And after the anger module is over, again we give the tool to measure the anger so that we can see the difference. And this is true for all the 7. Whether it is anger, fear, pain, whatever it is, we give a tool before we start and we give a tool after we finish to see the difference before and after. Now, in the process, we have created tools how to explore anger. Let us say you keep anger for 1 week or anger for 1 month, how to structure the whole process, how to standardize it. So we have created tools for revisiting your past. So you can have a structured revisit to the past, and I can say age 1 to 5, which events you recollect when you think you had developed anger. You may have expressed, you may not have expressed, but you did develop. You did not like it. Say 5 to 10, which are the events where you develop anger? And then we ask, in the tool itself, we write, have you been able to express it? Do you still feel angry about it? Can you think about it? Is it easy for you to think about it, or you don't want to think about that event? How has that event affected you if you remember anything? What was that event all about? So with the revisit, it's a structured revisit. So what we do is, stage 1 is we give the empirical tool for evaluation of the entity we are going to deal with. Stage 2, we give a free revisit. And freely, whatever comes to your mind, express it out, write it down on that given format. Anything about anger, step 1. Step 2, a structured revisit. And then we go into the exploration. So the first is cognitive exploration of it, and then the affective exploration of it. For cognitive exploration, we use tools which are from cognitive side or behavioral side. For affective exploration, we use tools from that side. We also use techniques some techniques which are very popular now. Some of them are used even in ISTDP EDT. Feeling the anger fully, which previously we used to see in psychodrama and anger focus therapy and scream therapy. So that way the tools are used, and we also use the holistic healing techniques and tools to explore the anger. So first, recognize what it was, where it developed, all the events of life. 2, cognitively understand it. 3, affectively feel it and undergo a catharsis. And then try to integrate all of these experiences into how you wish to live in future. So this is the way we can explore any other element, and there are some other techniques also, other tools also, very standardized, so that we can not only go in a standardized step-by-step way, but also have an empirical evaluation all the way. So one by one we go into all of the 7, and then we try to get into a consolidation mode, and we get into how to live, because ultimately everyone has to answer the question what to do and how to live. So in the light of it, then we get into a more integrative, philosophical, spiritual approach in order to help the person develop the idea of a good life.
So this can be done online, right, sir? It is not. It can be offered online as well from at
Yes.
a distance.
Yes. Uh, the way it can be done is if you do it offline, then confidentiality cannot be maintained and the cost will go up slightly because of the cost of the premises and so on. If you do it online, it becomes cheaper to that extent and people can get a new SIM card and share the real name only with the therapist and others may see only a nickname.
Yes.
And with that SIM card, you can join the WhatsApp group or any other group. And with that, you can continue incognito, maintaining your confidentiality, even when you are in a group. So people will know each other as X and Y. They won't know
Yeah.
the real names or they might know false names. So you can maintain confidentiality even in a group. And I think that's a very big leap in terms of the
Possible.
group therapy.
Yeah. And how about the scalability, sir? How can you scale it up? Like,
That's very big, very good part of this approach that uh, on one hand, this is a generic approach. It can be given to people who are healthy. It can be given to people who have a problem. It can be used as a preventive. It can also be used as a curative. And it's almost like a panch karma. In Ayurveda, whatever problem you have, they give you panch karma to detox the body so that the healing system of the body can heal whatever it has to heal. And it does not matter what is to be healed. The innate healing system will function to a better potential if you detox. And the same is true here. It's a kind of a psychological detox of the seven elements. So instead of a pancha karma, you can call it a shat karma. It's a seven entity thing, right? And that can be given to anybody. Now, with that said, on a scalability point of view, it's a very flexible and scalable model. Uh, you can actually use one person can actually do 3 to 4 groups a day. And he doesn't have to do it every day. He can take a break of 2 days in between. So in a week, he can easily handle 7 to 10 groups. And that means almost 50 to 75 people, which it's very difficult to otherwise deal with for a single person. So there is scalability at an individual level. You can also cast the model in terms of an organization. And if you go on a BPO kind of model, psychotherapy process outsourcing kind of model, then you are limited only by language. Because in India, you have adequate manpower which can be trained and we can easily give this service to rest of the world at practically such low costs that it cannot be even dreamt of in those countries. And in some African countries, the cost doesn't matter. Services are just not available. So when you talk of Indian rural areas, smaller districts, where even today you don't find any psychiatrist or psychotherapist. In fact, out of 1.3 billion people, I can easily say that half of them have no access to psychiatrist or psychotherapist. And that would be greater than population of many countries. So we are talking about almost 650 million people who don't have access to any psychiatrist or psychotherapist because nobody wants to go and live in those areas. So in India, how to reach out to those areas? In India, once you leave the top 100 districts of India, it's a different country altogether. So what we see in the media is only the top 100 districts of India. How do you reach the rest of them where the whole world is completely different and nobody wants to go and live there? No good psychiatrist or psychotherapist will go and live there. So even if the psychiatrist and psychotherapist don't go there, sicknesses definitely will go there because they universally go everywhere. So how to reach those parts of India? This can be done with an organized approach that you create a kind of a psychotherapy process outsourcing kind of unit. You can call it whatever name. You can reach out in India. You can scale up at a single point in a single city or a single metro and provide services to everyone. Once you are done with India, you can also offer it to all the English speaking world. And then if some people can be trained in the French or the Spanish language, you can offer it to them also. Language is the only barrier there. Distance is not a barrier at all. So with a bit of language training, you can get into a global offering of these services. So the scalability is very, very high. And even if you don't go global, even if you can just deal with the Indian situation, I think that itself is a Himalayan achievement.
True. Sir, another question, can this replace our mainstream therapies, or is it just for someone who cannot afford and where it cannot be reached, the mainstream therapies?
It's a good question, because those who can afford individual focus psychotherapy, which can go on for long, explore all areas, take the time for things to come up and do it at leisure, this therapy for them is not a substitute for mainstream therapy. So for those who can afford it, this therapy can be a preparatory therapy for mainstream therapy. Or if the mainstream therapy has not been able to do certain tasks on for certain effects, any of these 7 elements, then after the therapy, they can take this therapy up to remove whatever is left there because of the sheer intensity of focus. So that is one part, but that application I think would be 10%. 90% of the application will be for people who can't afford the mainstream psychotherapy. And that is a very big market, much bigger than those who can afford. It's 9:1. For every single person who can afford psychotherapy, there are 9 people who cannot afford psychotherapy. So that is where the real market would be. And the third application of this thing would be as a preventive, because this is a very good preventive, just as it is a good curative. And the uh, the standardization, right, allows for some degree of auto work to be done. One of the elements in this therapy is a very important element of self work. That between 2 sessions, you have some self work which is given. And one of the uh, versions of this model is that you have a therapist who is doing this on a weekly basis or twice a week basis, and there is a second therapist who is helping in self work. Usually it would be somebody junior who helps the main therapist in the self. It can be equals also, you can divide the work also. So you can become a self work coordinator for somebody and he can do it for you. You can do it that cross sharing, cross helping also. But self help is very important element in that process. Why did I refer to it? I have lost the track.
Sir, my question was, maybe you were answering that can it replace our regular therapy, the
Yes.
mainstream therapy?
Yeah. So this also brings out the element of that helping people with this self-help, with this self-work part of it. And going forward, the ambition is to make it as automatic and self-reliant as possible. The ultimate ideal, I should not say it an ideal, I should more call it a mirage, is to dispense with the therapist and to make it a therapist-free therapy. Now that would be possible only with high degree of robotization, automation, and so on. So at present, I would more of call it a mirage rather than an ideal. But the point to communicate is to make the person as independent as possible and as less dependent on the therapist as possible. So uh, this is where uh, the thrust of the therapy is, and there I would say, uh, apart from being used as a therapy for those who cannot afford it, others can use it as a preventive, and also for as much as possible uh, independent self-application of it with some help from the self-help coordinator, the self-work coordinator.
So then, can tools from holistic healing and spirituality be used in this approach?
Absolutely, because when we call it 7 stories therapy or 7 stories meditation, why do we call it so? Because all of us have 7 stories inside of us. We all carry in ourselves stories of anger, a story of envy, a story of pain, a story of shame and guilt, a story of inferiority. Nobody is free from these psychological entities, regardless of how well managed they are, whether they trouble or don't trouble, whether they add to life or don't add to life. And therefore, when we are dealing with these 7 stories, we are dealing with universal 7 stories in everyone, and it is as much a pathology healing effort as much it is a self-development effort. That being the case, spirituality and holistic healing have quite some things to offer. Tools like pranic healing, like Reiki, like Tai Chi, like yoga, some mystical tools, idol therapy. Some people can combo homeopathy, herbal usage, Ayurvedic. I'm talking about Ayurvedic herbal usage, and uh, techniques of visualization, meditation, ritual worship, as well as certain music and dance forms and certain body movements like you use in Tai Chi. Also yoga. All of these are used in spirituality and holistic healing because they also are addressing 7 stories in their own ways. It is not that other forms of therapy are not addressing this. Other forms of therapy are addressing this, they are addressing other issues also. But because we want a low cost, focused, standardized, easy to do, possible to automate kind of therapy, we have chosen a particular focus and we are dealing with what we believe are the entities at the heart of 75% of problems. And therefore, on this point, we are trying to heal 7 stories. Spirituality also is trying to heal 7 stories. There is convergence, and we both benefit if we collaborate and share and use insights and tools from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And sir, how do you see this particular tool evolving in the future? And anything that a therapist who is applying it needs to be careful with?
One is, I believe it will evolve first in an empirical sense. It will get validated more and more. Two, the validation will also, the nature of validation, the details of it will give us an idea about the scope of its application, which is the best scope where it can be applied. Three, it can be a very good preventive, and that is something governments and other people should be marketing, the preventive aspect of therapy. Fourth, uh, it will get into more and more of do it yourself and automation based therapy. So the role of therapist will reduce over a period of time. Now, will it not lead to problems of internalization of a good, reliable, stable object, a substitute parent, transference, projective identification, all those issues are there. I think over a period of time, in some ways, they will be dealt with. I have some ideas, but as we go along, I'll put them into experimentation and practice. But over a period of time, they will be dealt with. And even if not dealt with, except for those parts, there still is possible quite an amount of healing, because we will have some sort of a substitute therapy figure, just as we have a father figure. When we talk about this full automation, but that is quite in future. In the reasonable period of time that we are seeing ahead, we will have a therapist conduct this, and therefore, even though it's a group therapy, all those things will happen in individual therapy in some form will happen here also. In fact, even more, because there will be a cross current of these projections and transparencies and so on. It will not be a one-to-one, it will be a one-to-many and many-to-many kind of situation.
Yes.
So that will be one evolution. And last will be, we will be developing tools to make our engagement with these 7 entities more effective and quicker. And there we will bring in also tools from spirituality and holistic healing to add to this whole thing. So as it goes forward, all these areas we see development. With regard to your question, what care one should take, therapist should take, I would say that one should be trained in clinical psychology first. Second, one should have undergone some form of psychotherapy. Third, after undergoing some form of psychotherapy, he should get some basic training in this 7 stories meditation or 7 stories therapy, and then slowly start first under supervision, being a self work coordinator, and then take it full one, take the full responsibility, and use supervision for some time, at least for 1 year, before one goes completely independent. If this kind of road is followed, I don't think there is anything to fear. But straight away, if somebody jumps into it without qualifications or training, not only it may not be effective, uh, it may also be harmful to some, or people may carry with them a very uh, pleasant experience. And in countries where people are not therapy mature, they feel whatever therapy they see at the first instance is the only therapy existing. So if they are disappointed, they don't choose any other form of therapy. In fact, they never come back to psychotherapy.
Yes, definitely. It needs to be done in a very responsible way. Especially when as you rightly said, sir, in country like ours, where people don't so much talk about it. And clearly there is very little knowledge about what are the basket of therapies available.
True.
Coming to the future, of course, I have been your guinea pig when you have me and Bhavnaji. I remember you
Right.
when you were developing this, and we were the ones who
Yeah.
we you experimented on.
Right.
And sir, I think it is of course it needs to be supervised, and it needs to be done under a proper guidance. Otherwise it will be, as you said, it will be like any other immature therapy.
Right.
So that is something that I just wanted to add from my experience and my bit. Thank you so much, sir. It is always fascinating to talk to you, learn more about the kind of therapies, and of course, what the efficacy and so many other things. And for our viewers, you do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com with any of your queries and suggestions. Until we meet next time, thank you and namaste.
Namaste.